I think now I just accept that I want to get better. And if I want to get better, I need to listen. I know that everyone else is listening. So, well, not everyone else, but the listeners are listening. So it's my duty to do the same and try to get better. What is it that you really enjoy? Because there's no point speaking about things that I'm interested in. It's got to be, you've got to be interested. And what are you doing that other people may not know yet? I think everyone's got something, whether you speak to an intern who's never coached in their life, or you speak to someone that's been involved for 30 years, there's always something that you can take. Inspire me, excite me, get me doing something. And I think just the act of being in front of that group is so valuable in anything moving forwards. Like, trust me, if you can inspire and put on a decent session for a group of 9-year-olds for an hour, and you go to a group of athletes who are 21 and you've got 15, you'll be fine. It's not shouty, it's not in your face, but it's got the little logo and you know that represents quality, or you'd hope it represents quality.
Welcome to this new episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Moxy Monitor. For those who don't know about the Moxy Monitor yet, it's a NIRS device that measures muscle oxygen saturation and blood volume in real time. It's a non-invasive sensor that is placed on the skin and can be worn during any training or sporting activity. Motocross riders and climbers wear it on their forearms, hockey players on the ice, swimmers can wear it in the water. I've used it to test rugby players, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes, and more. The Moxy allows you to individualize work and rest periods, optimize load, reps, and sets, identify training thresholds in real time, and even correct movements based on what the data is showing you. You can also use the Moxy Monitor to determine an athlete's energetic limiting factor and their individual training zones. Using this process, you can better target the athlete's limiter with precision in order to improve their programming, training, and in turn, their performance. You can view and collect the data on your Garmin watch, and you can also pair the Moxy with other physiological testing products such as the VO2 Master, Pnoe, and Cosmet VO2 systems. The Moxy is a tool I've used weekly for over a year now with great success, and I highly recommend it to any coach who's interested in digging a little bit deeper on the physiological side of health, fitness, or performance. You can use the coupon code UPSIDE at checkout for a 5% discount on moxymonitor.com/shop. That's UPSIDE for a 5% discount. With that said, let's get into the show. Okay, Rob, we're live on the podcast. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. It's a great pleasure to have you. I was listening to your podcast long before I started mine, so I have to say huge props to you for everything that you've built. Maybe for the couple people that don't know who you are and who don't know your podcast, can you give us a bit of background?
Yeah, of course. So I started the Pacey Performance podcast, which is obviously my name, back in December 2013. And within probably about a week, regretted naming it after myself. But I was inspired by, and this is not putting myself amongst these guys, but you look at like Eric Cressy, Mike Boyle, and it felt like the thing to do.
Yeah.
Instantly regretted it. But I've had to live with that decision ever since.
Did you ever think about changing it since you thought about this early on, or?
Yes, but I just didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what the alternative was. So it was like, I've made my decision, I'm rolling with it. And I've rolled with it ever since. And I think it's probably caused a little bit of an issue because of my inferiority complex kicking in a few times. But yeah, going since 2013, 381 episodes that I've done so far.
Wow.
So it's been a weekly podcast since 2015, I think, or late 2014. Speaking with people from around the world in high performance positions, high performance directors, high performance managers, heads of sports science, heads of strength and conditioning, and just getting an insight into what they do. Like that was the selfish thing that I wanted back in 2013, and I wanted to give people a reason to talk to me. Like, why would Mike Boyle speak to Rob Pacey? He probably would have. Ironically, the thing is, he probably would have done, because these guys, Mike's good and Mike's a good guy, and there's lots of good guys and girls out there. But I felt like I needed an excuse for them to speak to me, which was a great excuse. And I actually thought at the time I was in a job where I wanted to get out and I wanted to have a new challenge. And I thought that building a network through doing a podcast could help do that. It didn't do that. it didn't get me a new job. What it did do is something better. It created an audience, and it gave it gave a platform for these top practitioners to share what they do, and that was much better, and has led on to many other more exciting things than just getting a new job. So yeah, still going strong. In August last year, rebranded. Pace Performance Podcast stayed because that had the kind of brand collateral behind it. But now it sits under an umbrella brand called SportSmith. And I've just tried to basically replicate what I've done with the podcast in an audio form, and replicate that into written form and video, and invite contributors to write articles about their practice and about their thoughts, and same on video. So that's where we are in January 2022.
Yeah, I want to dig into SportSmith because it's a very, very interesting concept in my opinion. But I want to first go back to the podcast. You said, a good excuse to talk to people, and I can totally relate. I think it's for me, it's what I always say, it's my continuing education. So I may not be doing as many seminars and webinars as I used to, but getting to talk to 2 or 3 people of many different walks of life, but they're all kind of in the same, wide industry that we operate in is extremely enriching, and having all those different perspectives is quite special. Who, if you had to name 1 or 2, if there even was a person in particular who pushed you to, or what was your inspiration to start the podcast?
The inspiration was a couple of guys here in the UK who did a podcast and ran a couple of webinars back in 2012, 2013. A guy called Brendan Chaplin, who lives in the north of England here, and then Nick Grantham. You may have heard of Nick. He's involved a little bit with the NSCA, or has in the past.
Okay.
And they run it, and I was listening thinking, I think I could do that. Like everyone does when they listen to kind of experts do what they do, and I think, I could do that. And I just blagged it, like absolutely winged it from the start. And like the audio setup was just non-existent. Literally, it was my phone on a speaker. The audio was terrible. My audio was terrible. The guest's audio was terrible through Skype. But I just didn't know any different. And I think that's probably been a bit of a theme throughout this journey from 2013, is just try stuff, just do it, learn as you go. And I suppose now I've tried to be a little bit more refined. But yeah, that's just been the theme, really. Get something and learn on the job.
Did you go back and listen to your first episodes?
Oh God. Yeah, you know what? I bet it took me till episode 50 or 60 to actually properly listen back. And because I knew that I sounded horrendous. But like I say, I hopefully can become a little bit more refined now. But I think now I just accept that I want to get better. And if I want to get better, I need to listen. I know that everyone else is listening. So, well, not everyone else, but the listeners are listening. So it's my duty to do the same and try to get better. That's been the aim.
Yeah, it's quite, I think I can definitely relate to how you operated in the first days. I was the same. I decided I needed a podcast, and I contacted Kevin, a colleague who works here in Geneva. And I said, "Hey, Kev, my name's Sean. I'm starting a podcast. You'll be my first episode. Are you game to go?" And we did it. And like you said, I had no clue. I'd watched, do you remember did you watch any like tutorials on how to set up your podcast? Before you did? No, you just
not one thing.
Because I remember watching. I remember watching a couple of videos on YouTube of, here's a step-by-step of how you set up your podcast and how you upload it. And so I did that. And then I felt like I could, just do it. But again, the first time it was like, I had my list of questions and I was like looking at my list and like, just sticking to him. And I find that the more I go, the less questions I have. I have broad topics. And then when the person talks, things come up. How did you get organized at first? And then how did that evolve over time?
Yeah, again, at the start, well, it was 2013, so there wasn't that many podcasts around at that point. Like in our industry, there was Mike doing his thing at strengthcoach.com. There wasn't that many more. And there certainly wasn't the amount of tutorials and support there is now. But in terms of my prep, I use social media a lot for my prep. Like what is what's on the mind of the person that I'm going to speak to. Who are they who are their influences? So if they've got a conversation going, I don't know, use Mike as an example. Is Mike speaking to some of the guys around Change Direction? Is he getting involved in the conversation? And that kind of just guides me into what they're interested in at the time, or what's sparking discussion in their brain. And then use the research that they've done previously, potentially use articles that they've written, and potentially listen to other podcasts that they've been on. And I just get a feel for what they're interested in, and just try to tease the unique things out of them. I think one big thing that I try to say to them is, what is it that you really enjoy? Because there's no point speaking about things that I'm interested in. It's got to be, you've got to be interested. And what are you doing that other people may not know yet? Just to try to get something unique, because, you know, there's a lot of podcasts out there now, and they might have spoke about certain things that I want to talk about on other podcasts, but I want to make it a little bit unique. So that's normally the line of questioning that I go down. But similar to you, I have a list of questions. And at the start, I was very structured. No matter what happened, I was getting through these questions. And I think sometimes now certain guests do want that. Like, they do want the structure and they want to stick to it because they're comfortable in that, in with that. But there's others that just go, I haven't even read the questions. Let's just see where it goes. And I'm probably somewhere in the middle. I do like a little bit of structure, but once I get in the flow, I do like to just go off on tangents. So yeah, it probably works for everyone, hopefully.
It's funny that you mentioned the fact that you always ask them what they enjoy talking about, which I did the same. I sent you the few topics, and at the beginning I wasn't sure if that was the right thing to do. You know, should I be asking the guests about the topics, or should I be just guiding the thing from A to Z? But it's somewhat, I guess, comforts me in my approach to hear that you're doing the same, because. And at the end of the day, like you said, it makes sense to bring out the best in the person that's on the other side. And sometimes there's people that you interview that you know really well, and other times they're maybe completely new to you, but very maybe interesting. And it's probably better to get some kind of a general idea of what they're into before you go in, so you can at least kind of guide your own train of thought, right?
100%. I mean, there's been a few that I've jumped on a call with beforehand, a couple of days before, had a bit of a chat for half an hour. And it's those ones that I think you get the reward from that initial interaction. So when you do jump online, I know it's more time consuming on both sides. It's often difficult to do, but I think you do get the rewards on the back end with the outcome of the episode, because things are ironed out. Maybe a little bit of awkwardness is ironed out. You get a bit of an idea who that guy is or who that girl is, and just getting an idea of what they're interested in, so you can guide things from there. So that's worked out pretty well for me, but not always doable, hardly ever doable. But like I say, you do get the rewards. From
a schedule standpoint, if we keep talking about rewards, what would you say your podcast has brought to you? What have been the big things over the years that you've gotten from the podcast?
Right. It's everything that I do now, I can trace back somehow to the podcast. Like, I haven't got jobs directly because of doing the podcast, but I've got jobs because of the network that I've built from the podcast. I've got jobs from that. But thankfully I'm self-employed now. So it's given me the ability to do that, as the podcast and things that have spurned off the back of it. But most importantly, it's given me the opportunity to talk to some cool people. And you're talking to people in Australia, you're talking to people in Europe, most of which you're never ever going to meet in person, some of which do and become friends and become kind of confidants and acquaintances and whatnot. But I think that's the biggest thing for me, is the diversity of people that you get to speak to. And it still baffles me that when you can email someone and they go, yeah, I'll jump on. I've got an hour to give to you to speak. And it's great. Like, it's humbling, I guess, for people to be able to give up their time and just to have a chat. And at the start, I'm super interested in what these guys and girls do day to day. Like, I'm really interested in that. Like, what they do in the gym, what they do on the field, how they do things. Now I'm really interested in them as a person. It's kind of morphed. And we do touch on the X's and O's in the podcast, of course.
Yeah.
But I think if I went solely my way, I'd just be diving into like people's families and why they do what they do. So that's pretty a bit of a transition for me. Yeah.
It's really funny because I mean, you started way ahead, but I can completely relate to the path that you've been on and the types of conversations. I recorded one this morning with Patrick Funk. He's a CrossFit coach in Germany. And we did not talk about trading. We talked for an hour and we didn't even touch on training. We talked about work-life balance, entrepreneurship, lockdowns, sleep, and self-care. And we didn't touch on training. And I absolutely loved it. And I find myself more and more, especially with people that I get on a second time, or a couple people. One stands to mind, Brian Mann, where we just went straight there and we didn't talk about VBT. We didn't talk about anything else. We just talked about life stuff, and it was really, really enjoyable. What do you think it is about those topics that make them so enjoyable to exchange on?
I don't know. I just think it's a natural evolution as people get a little bit older, maybe people get a little bit further on in their career, and the softer stuff does become more relevant and more pertinent in people's lives. Like people have kids. I've got a 6-month-old, and
Congrats.
I'm interested in how thank you. I'm understanding how people deal with parenthood and how they, again, work-life balance, as you mentioned. It's all these things that you're not only dealing with at work or as part of a job or a role that you're undertaking, but it's just part of it, like life. And I think that's the stuff that I enjoy, and that's probably reflected in what I listen to.
Okay.
However, one thing I'm conscious of is going down the softer skills, communication, leadership, all these kind of things that are quite buzzing around our industry a lot. I think you can be guilty of gravitating towards that versus the solid knowledge base and the craft of what you do. And I think, have we gone a little bit too far that way in the softer stuff? Potentially, because for me, it's a little bit easy to consume than diving deep and developing that knowledge base. I think we've just got to be careful. I think that's where I'm conscious when it comes to the podcast is, yes, I want to know about the life and the intricacies of how this person works, but I also want to help people develop that knowledge base through the sharing from the guests. So definitely a combination of two, I think.
Would you say that maybe that evolution in how you, or maybe the topics that you're most interested in diving into, reflects the natural evolution of maybe a coach and the coaches that I've listened to you from early on, where at the start, you just need to know how stuff works and you just need to see it all and you need to kind of piece it together. And I feel like once you get to that point, then you can start being like, okay, so now, and not that you should do it only in that sequence and that you have to wait to get number one to go into the softer skills, but I feel like the evolution of the softer skills maybe comes after the development of a broad knowledge base on all things training. So you get kind of the science first, and then you get the art. Would you relate to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. And that's what I was kind of getting at with, are we making that? Not that it's a cut, like you stop and you start again, like you stop the science and you start the art. Like there's obviously a thread throughout. But I just get conscious that people get influenced by books that the certain coaches are reading, and they're on culture, they're on leadership, they're on communication. I'm like, if I was a 22-year-old coach, like, should I be going down that track so much and at the potential expense of the knowledge base that I should be potentially developing? Like, I think we are, and I'm probably the worst at it, guilty of that a little bit.
Okay.
So yeah, that's just my thoughts on it.
You talked about, how much it's brought to you since the beginning. And again, I can 100% relate to that. It never got me a job per se, but I've stopped actually counting the number of things or opportunities or chances or contacts that I've had from the podcast, because it's just like you said, part of everything that I do. Would you would you recommend that people start a podcast in 2022?
I think it's harder than people think. Not the act of the interview, but just everything else that comes around it. I read a little stat the other day, actually, and it was from Apple, and it was, I think, about April 2021.
Mm-hmm.
And was it 2 million? They hosted 2 million shows on Apple, but only 24% had got more than one episode.
Wow, what? 24%?
24. What was it? Let me just get the stats in my head. Was it 20? It was 24%, but 56% had got more than 10, or the way around, potentially the way around. Anyway,
Okay.
what it worked out to, in a word, was 90% of podcasts don't have more than 10 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got more than 10 episodes, you're already in the top 10% of podcasts on Apple. Happy days. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's harder than people think because there's so much that goes on around it. The planning, the logistics of lining it up with the guest, the obviously distribution that comes off the back of it.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't just, if you do the podcast and don't tell anyone about it, no one's going to listen. So the distribution on social media, there's all that rabbit hole that you can go down there. So yeah, it's hard. Is there space for more podcasts? 100%. 100%. Would I be getting into it if I didn't start the podcast in 2013? Would I be doing it now? I'm not quite sure. How would I do? I think it's just a process of going through, how do I differentiate? How do I do something unique? Not only for the listener, but for me to stay interested and keep doing it for more than 10 episodes. So yeah, that'd be my line of thinking. How can I be different to what is out there at the minute?
Did you ever get to that kind of wall where you weren't enjoying it as much as you were at other times? And if so, what did you do in those cases?
Yeah, I got to episode 100 and I remember the conversation. I remember having it with my wife and saying, that's me done. I've done what I wanted to do. I've got to 100. I'm out. And she was like, why? Do you not like it? I'm like, well, yeah, I like doing it. And she's like, well, just keep doing it. Just see what happens. And now I'm at 380 or whatever it is. So I'm so pleased that she convinced me to keep going. And I think it was at a time where I was struggling for guests and the logistics didn't line up. The calendars didn't line up. I was getting a bit frustrated.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh, I'm out. I'm done. But thankfully, it carried on. I just pushed through, I think. And now it is part of my life. Like genuinely, it is just what I do. Lining up with people, jumping on with people, and churning out the episodes.
Do you get people on that have been maybe recommended by someone or requested, but that you're not really interested in, but still go through for the audience? Or
I think everyone's got something, whether you speak to an intern who's never coached in their life, or you speak to someone that's been involved for 30 years, there's always something that you can take.
Mm-hmm.
And there's never been someone that I haven't wanted to get on just because I think people are interested. Like them two definitely come together. But don't get me wrong, I am trying to provide a service. So I am looking to the audience for inspiration and recommendations. But that's not to say that just because they recommend them, I don't want them to come on. We've had loads of people that I've been super, super excited about, like Eddie Jones came on for episode 300, who's the England head coach of England rugby. And he was great. He was tuning in. He was dialing in from Japan, where he lived at the time. And he was superb. And just to get 45 minutes with someone like him was great. So there's been lots of exciting people, and hopefully more exciting people to come.
And anybody else comes to mind? Obviously not negating all the other hundreds of guests that you've had, but some that stuck out for you, whether it's because maybe they seemed inaccessible to you, but you still managed to get through, or just really good conversations that you maybe weren't expecting, or something like this.
Yeah, so I'll use Mike Boyle as a great example. So I can't remember, 130, maybe 140, something like that. So relatively early days, he reached out to me and said, would you be interested in having me as a guest? I followed your stuff. I'd like to come on for a chat. And that was kind of the first person that had reached out to me. And I was like, wowzer, Mike wants to give an hour of his time to have a chat. How good is this? And obviously anyone that follows Mike knows the kind of conversations that you're going to have, probably touching on a little bit of stuff that's maybe a little bit controversial and just pressing people's buttons when it comes to a few topics. And I quite like that. People that aren't scared of ruffling a few feathers, not just for the sake of ruffling a few feathers, but do it with the right intentions. So yeah, Mike would be one. Definitely Eddie Jones would be another. There's loads. I like the older kind of generation of coaches who have maybe come through a teaching background, and I think you can really tell when those guys come on the podcast. There's a guy, an English guy who's now in Australia called Kelvin Giles, youth development, and he'd come through a teaching pathway, was a PE teacher for a number of years, and I just love them guys. I love them. I can imagine them in front of a group, being so engaging. So yeah, I do like probably the 55, 60 plus coaches, because class, really good.
What would you say differentiates them from the younger generation of coaches? Because there's always the oversimplifications of the new generation versus the old generation. So it's not necessarily that I'm going into or looking for, but the coaches that have spent literally decades in the field, how is their approach different than the younger coaches?
I just think that the guys who were in that age bracket that I'd spoken about seem to have come through at a time where strength and conditioning wasn't. So when I say come through, maybe went to university, went to college, or just came through the system, the sports system, became probably a fitness coach or something. Especially here in the UK, that was the term that was more often used. They came through a pathway that was very coaching, teacher focused, versus now you're coming through a science pathway. Sports science been obviously, especially here in the UK, that's normally the route that people go down. And I think you just get a sense of authority when they've come to this teaching pathway, an incredible communication ability. Eddie Jones been a fantastic example. You listen to him for 5 minutes and whatever he says you're going to do, having listened to him. And Kelvin's exactly the same. And there's more that I could probably reel off who have been on the podcast who are in that bracket. Ian Jeffrey's been one of them, a coach here in the UK. I just think the science is there, but it's there as a support. And what's important is the coaching and the communication side of things. Whereas more recently, it's probably flipped. You've got that scientific underpinning, and it's a matter of you developing the communication and the coaching ability on top. So yeah, I like them guys and girls who've come through that pathway who are a little bit older.
What would you say is, since it's a field that you're involved in, the education in sports performance, is there a right way to go through it? Is there an ideal way to come through and learn and then apply and then get practice and improve? Is there an optimal way, would you say?
I think that the traditional route now is to go to university, get an undergraduate degree. And I think no matter how much bashing universities get, like that is the pathway that has seemed to have developed, and that is going to be there for a long time. Like it is the undergrad, it is the masters, and probably the PhD is going to become the masters as more people do get PhDs. Is there an optimum? I'm not quite sure, but the one thing I would say is that any undergraduate out there should be getting coaching experience as early on that process as possible. Not waiting to the end of a degree to get cracking, get started, but start ASAP. And I think this drum gets banged a lot. And I'm not sure whether it's been listened to. Maybe it is, and I'm just not aware of it. But being in front of a group, any group, doesn't matter. They don't have to be wearing a nice kit because they're part of a good team, a good organization. It's just anyone. Like, Janet, the accountant who lives 2 doors down, and her friend do a PT session. Like, it's that. How do you inspire these people to meet their goals? Their goal may not be to win a World Cup, but it may be to, I don't know, look decent in a dress they're going to for a wedding. I don't know, but it's just inspiring. And I think even my experiences going through elementary schools and primary schools of doing PE lessons, like, you've got 30 kids, probably 75% of them don't want to do it, not interested. You've got probably 5 that are really, really keen, and the rest are just like, I could take it or leave it. So you've got to work on that huge percentage of the group to inspire them to put on something. And you're stood there, they're staring at you going, come on then, what have you got for me? Like, inspire me, excite me, get me doing something. And I think just the act of being in front of that group is so valuable in anything moving forwards. Like, trust me, if you can inspire and put on a decent session for a group of 9-year-olds for an hour, and you go to a group of athletes who are 21 and you've got 15, you'll be fine. You'll be absolutely fine. And I think that's probably, for me, that's not value enough of just the act of being in front of a group and being expected to do something and engage them. So yeah, whether there's an optimal, I'm not quite sure, but there would be an optimal for me in what the experiences that people have during that pathway. And it is just to do as much as possible. If you want to be a coach, it's not rocket science to me. Just do it as much as possible.
Yeah, I was reflecting on that while you were mentioning talking to a group. I was in the Swiss Army in my mandatory service, and I was lucky enough to rank up, and so I had a lot of people that I was in charge of, and so I thought it came natural to me then when I picked up the strength leadership with the local rugby club here that I used to play at, because I had 40 guys and I knew how to handle a group. But like you said, if you don't have that exposure prior to, it's a lot more difficult. And on the kid side, what came to mind was I can't remember his name for the life of me. I've been trying. He's in the rugby education here in Switzerland, Swiss rugby curriculum. And in the first module, you go up for, I think it's 2 weekends, and he's there on one afternoon, and he's got a class of, I think there were 7 or 8-year-olds, and they've never played rugby before. They're just there for their regular PE, but they're just with him. So they don't know him. Mm-hmm. They don't know the sport. And he is literally a magician, where he led that group of 20 kids. And in 45 minutes, they were literally without the contact, but they were playing by the rules. He started with like a tag, and he built up the rules over an hour with all his, he said, I'm a magician. That was the first thing he said to the kids. So they were all sitting down, and he said, I'm a magician. And they were all already like wide-eyed and what's going on here. Yeah. And he said, every time I say, what would he say? Every time I say candle, you guys have to stop and get into candle position. And then he tested it a couple times. And so anytime he had something to say, he would scream out candle, and they would all stop and they would all listen. And he had a bunch of little tricks like this, but the skill of the coaching was phenomenal. And just seeing that firsthand on a group of kids was amazing. So I meet you there, I think. And it's probably one of the most challenging things to do, wouldn't you say, of coaching a group of younger kids?
And it's the structure, it's setting up the session so it flows, so you haven't got any downtime. Mm-hmm, so the kids can, I don't know, be pulling each other's shorts down or hitting each other or, getting into fights. It's just this constant flow of the session with good, solid, like discipline, like genuinely the discipline, like the candle thing, like get them to stop, stand still with a bunch of 7-year-olds. Like, you shout it, they're not doing it. Why would they? But make it cool, so it's appealing to them to do it. Like a candle. Brilliant. So yeah, I think that can offer so much to anyone to work with a bunch of kids, like a bunch of 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, just to control the group, the flow, the communication. They're making it fun, appealing to what they want to do, but also getting get what the coach wants out of the session as well.
going back to you mentioning that everybody's got something interesting to bring to the conversation, did you always have such an open mind about what you could learn from every individual, or did the podcast process bring you around to thinking like that?
I think definitely the podcast has helped because, like I said, the amount of the diversity that I've had through, I don't know, through different ages, through 25-year-olds to 75-year-olds, people in positions of authority, like a director of, to people who are a little bit lower down the chain. And I think it definitely has done that. I probably haven't explored that as much as I probably could. There's always been a thing that I've toyed with the idea of, and that's getting like a group of interns on and just getting their take on their development through the industry, or their take on how they've been developed as coaches within their organization, what can be done better, what's been done really well. And I think that's probably something that I haven't explored enough, of getting the, not to be disrespectful, but kind of lower end, beginner end of the kind of coaching pathway. But no, I think no matter who you get on, there's going to be something interesting to talk about. But the sad thing is, and I think you'll find this as well when you publish something on social media, more and more it's dependent on the name. It's dependent on the name. It's dependent on the following that person has, which is quite sad, but it's just the reality in the world that we live in. So it's hard not to be guided by that, especially if you've got sponsors that want downloads and want listens, to not be guided by the social media following of guests it's tough. It's tough. And especially when you look on Instagram, you've got people with 60,000 followers, 70,000 followers who've got influence. To tap into their audience is almost not an easy win, but they bring people with them. But is that the way to go? And I think you still got to evaluate those kind of people to see if they fit the values of what you want from the podcast. And what's making it even trickier now is that people who are legit and have been around for a long time and doing great work are seeing that as a valid way to build their own audience. So you've got the guys and girls in the audience of 100,000 who have done really well to build that, but maybe haven't got who don't align with the values that you want to bring to your podcast. But you've also got people who've got 100,000 followers now who do. So you've got to be really careful of, just sticking to your principles, I guess, and evaluating who's done what and how.
Yeah, I think sticking to principles is what sticks out to me, because at the beginning I was debating, okay, should I do it in French or should I do it in English? Because I speak both. And I had guests that I wanted to speak to in French who don't speak English, and vice versa. And in the end, I said, fuck it, I'm doing this for me, and I'm just going to do both. And if people want to, they just learn the damn language if you want to listen. And same with who I want to invite on, is there is that aspect of, well, now I can start inviting bigger names because I've had other names on before. So they're more likely to say yes. But then there's also I enjoy talking to people that maybe don't even have a following, or even hard to find on social, because like you said, you can definitely get something out of everyone. I've been surprised a few times where I've had guests with a big social following and had very, very low numbers on the podcast, and then some people that are barely on social, and I get some really decent numbers as well. So there's definitely a trend where if they come with a bigger audience, like you said, you're more likely to get some numbers. But then there's also you could also get surprised in all of this. Besides the logistical challenges that you mentioned before, has there been other things on the podcast side that have challenged you?
It's an interesting one, because I was going to come back to you with a similar question. I'd like to get your take on this. It's particular people, and well, obviously won't mention any names here, but it's particular people who conduct themselves in a certain way on social media that, although can share great knowledge and potentially have great knowledge, that your values don't align with how they come across and how they present themselves on social media. So whether that be I don't know, slightly offensive posts or misogynistic posts or offensive posts or over the top swearing. And I think I'm more conscious of that now, and how I not pick and choose, because that feels like I'm playing God here to a certain extent. But I think I've got to look after my brand. And if I'm aligning with another person who does not hold the same values as I do when it comes to presenting themselves, should I invite that person on? I think that's a big thing, especially when that person may have a big engaged audience, and that person would offer such good knowledge. So that becomes a real challenge and I've changed my stance on this a little bit, probably in the last year.
Okay.
Before, I was like, I'll let that slide. That guy's got a good following, good information. It ticks all the right boxes. It doesn't really matter. Now it does matter to me.
Okay.
It really, really does.
Yeah.
So if the values don't align, it's not happening, no matter who the person is, I think. I'd love to get your take on that. Is that something that you've come across as well?
100%. So my take is slightly different than yours, in the sense that, and I've been following a lot, not to go too far down that road, but I've been following a lot of what's going on the censorship side online over the last few years, especially. And so that's a topic of interest for me, besides everything else that I do in the podcast and sports. And my take on it, I think now, is that I provide a platform.
Yes.
But just because I provide a platform does not mean that I'm in agreement with everything that the person might say, or even with their values. And if someone wants to come on my podcast and bury themselves by saying dumb shit or by behaving themselves like an asshole, they can do that. And I'm okay with that, because I don't think that me giving them a platform means that I stand by the way that they behave. And obviously I have to make that clear in the conversation that I'm not, I don't agree with them, or I've never come to the point where I had to moderate a conversation to that extent. But I've had some people come on where I don't agree with them, and I've asked them questions and kind of tried to put my point forward. And in the end, so I don't know if I've ever gone into difficult enough situation where I've had to really think this through. So what I'm giving you here is more of, let's say, my ideal principles, where if they want to come on and they want to say stupid stuff, then they're free to do that. And it doesn't, and I would also even go as far as to say that there's value in this, because you need to see the good, the bad, and the ugly to make up a valid to have a valid position or thought on any topic. And if you only see the good and the best, and you never see the other side, then it's going back to you need a complete picture. And this is, unfortunately or not, it's part of the picture. And but I do get your point, because there is that standard that you want to uphold, and so finding the balance between the two is tough. But again, I also think that it's important for people to see and hear everything so they can make their own opinions. And so I'm sure I obviously filter who I have on, because it's my decision to have them on or not. But at the same time, I try to make that filter as light as I can, in the sense that
exactly.
I don't want to choose for other people what they can listen to or not. I mean, not that I have to provide for everybody in every single perspective, but I don't know if you see what I mean.
100%. And I think the light touch is the right way to go. And I think the bar, my cutoff is pretty high in terms of what you've got to do for me to go, ooh, I'm not quite sure this is the right fit. And I'll be completely transparent. I had a round table that I'd organized, and we had 3 people, and it was 3. I was struggling to not say who was involved, but we've got 3 people, and 2 people raised concerns about the one person, because they both had positions at organizations which could have been misinterpreted for association with that person.
Okay.
So I had to get rid of 2 or get rid of 1. So not get rid of, but just approach the 2 or approach the 1 and say, I'm sorry, but this is going to have to happen. And the 2 people basically said, if that 1 person is involved, we can't be, unfortunately. So I had to go to the 1 person and say, I'm really sorry, but it's just not going to work out this time. We'll do something another time. And that was the big eye-opening moment, that these 2 people who I respect highly are not willing to be associated with this other person because of various different reasons of how their values may come across publicly. So that was me going, ooh, I think I need to think a little bit more about this situation. And that was my only thinking. But I think that bar is pretty high in terms of, the cutoff.
It didn't even come, in that case, it didn't even come from you.
Didn't even come from me, but it sparked my thinking of how would I react in that situation, and how should I react in that situation? And should I, up until that point, I have no cutoff. I didn't care. If you want to do something in your personal life and put it on social media, you fire away. Nothing to do with me. But their stance made me think, okay, I think I need to reevaluate how I go about things. So that again, it's probably only happened once, but it's definitely made me more conscious of the decisions that I make. But I'll preface that with saying, I'm not playing God here. I'm trying not to filter. If there is information, good, bad, or indifferent, they should come on. But I think at some point, there's got to be some sort of a line that if crossed, I'm not quite sure this fits. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I totally get it. But at the same time, reverse of the coin, it's our show. We do what we want. And 100%. If we decide to not have someone on, we can make that choice. Did you, without going into names or anything, but on the 2, let's call it the 2v1 situation, were you then more inclined to be favorable to the 2 people position or to the single person position, in the sense that did you say, think about the implications for the people that might not want to be associated with someone, or the other way around, where you thought, well, it's maybe you have to almost double down and say, well, if those people don't want to be associated with that person, maybe there's a good reason that person needs to have a more of a voice and have their point put across, or maybe someone who disagrees with them actually talk it out versus just not associate at all and have no conversation. Because and that's my take, and I'd love to hear yours. We can't solve, in today's world, it's just so evident. We can't solve any problems if we don't have conversations. And so for people to have different opinions and different perspectives is important, but it's even more important to then bring them together so they can reconcile, or at least expose their own perspectives, their respective perspectives, and then for people to either make their own, or for those people, if they're involved in more of a dialectic process rather than a debate process, to find truth and find solutions and try to meet somewhere in the middle. So I don't know if you see where I'm going with that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think in this situation, there's always context in this situation. Now, the 2, oh God, I feel like I'm getting in deep here, but it's fine. The two had a professional relationship with the other person. It wasn't I've never spoke to that guy. I don't have anything to do with him. They'd met, but it was recent actions that had sparked both them people to go, I'm not quite sure that this relationship is good, because it from their employer, it could potentially look like that you're in support of that person.
So from
association,
if their job could have been, or it would have been maybe awkward or something.
Yeah, I think it was solely to do with the perception of the organization that was employing them. Okay, that if they were to be seen together, the power of association would be seen as a negative for them.
Right. So essentially they self-censored because of the organization that they were a part of.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they were worried that the organization may see that association being one that they'd chosen.
Yeah.
And which could implicate them should that other person do something crazy online. So they were like, just remove me from the situation,
right?
Because it's just it could potentially get awkward. Like
Right.
someone from the organization goes on, oh, so-and-so is doing that. Oh, who's that guy who's doing it with? Oh, he's legit. Like, but who's that? Oh, okay. That's weird.
Yeah,
Why is he doing it?
Why
is
would
he
you?
So then, yeah, so that was the only thing. And then again, I look on their perspective and go, yeah, I wouldn't want them to lose their job.
No,
if something happened on my watch to a certain extent. So yeah, remove the issue and go again. So that was So that was the situation. But it was difficult. Like it was over a weekend for me, and it was difficult to navigate. Like, what the heck do I do here? How do I approach this person? Should I be approaching the person? Should I just go, well, he's not got an issue. It's you two that got an issue. You go. I'm keeping him or her if it was a her. So yeah, it was difficult. But I had this chat with Robin Thorpe. Used to be at Manchester United. Is in the States now, doing some consultancy and doing really well. And it was the conversation around who is putting on online education, and you go to a certain person and it comes with a certain bias. It comes with a certain angle that they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to understand that. And he wrote me and he's like, Rob, you're the podcast person. It's you that is choosing these people to come on. Like that, there's your biases are involved here as well in choosing the guests. People have got to be aware of that and aware of the angle that people are coming from. So yeah, it's a super interesting area. And I think probably people just forget about it and just think that person's doing it from the goodness of their heart, when that might be the case, but there's also the little bits and bobs that are going on around that as well.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting. I never had this kind of situation. I haven't done many with multiple guests yet. That's something I want to do more, because I find it even more fun when there's two people.
It's so cool.
Even especially if they don't know each other, but they're respected in their own fields. And you bring them together and you usually create something at 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing, which is always fascinating. I've had one time where two people that I'd previously had as guests went at each other on social media afterwards. And it was one of them just has a big mouth, let's say like this. He's very good at what he does, but he just likes the sound of his own voice a little too much. And he really went out of line and spoke on things he shouldn't have spoken. And I had a couple of people, and that made me think at this time as well, a couple of people messaged me and say, what are you going to do? Because I know both of them well. I'm friends with both of them. And so some people messaged me and said, what are you going to do? Are you going to take down so-and-so's podcast? Or I was like, no, I'm not the arbiter of anything. I have people on, They talk, they say good things, they say bad things, and then people make up their own opinion about it. And me getting into other affairs outside of this it's not my place. But it was an interesting situation to be in, because it sparked that train of thought of, okay, what place do I hold? And what standard do I want to hold myself up to? And what do I do something? Do I not do anything? Do I say something? Do I not? Do I get involved? Or it's never fun when there's friction, because I'm not one to look or to kind of seek those kind of interactions. So it's never fun, but it definitely forces you to think and grow a little bit.
100%. And there was a thing a few years ago, and it was public in the public domain, that rumors had come out about a particular person in their industry who has a big following, specifically on Instagram. And I'd had that person on a couple of months before that, and these public revelations had come out about his personal life. And I got a few messages from random people saying, have you seen the reports on what so and so's doing? Are you going to take his podcast down? I was like, no, absolutely not. Like, and that really does that contradict what I'd said before. But it was like, we did this 6 months ago. Like, maybe just paper. How do I know whether that's true or false or whatever? I don't know the ins and outs of it. So yeah, but I don't know. People, the old cancel culture. Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one.
It definitely is. What's the future of podcasting? Because I feel like it's in a it's almost like I see it as being in the twilight zone right now, where you're on all those different podcasting platforms. You're not specific to any social media platform, which means you're kind of isolated from all that cancel culture stuff. You can kind of do whatever you want, and you're not really tied to any big company directly, other than your hosting platform, if that's even one that you're tied to, because you could easily switch. Yeah. So what's the future of podcasting? Is it going to stay in the format that it's in right now? Do you see an upcoming evolution to that medium? Because it's new, quote unquote. It's fairly new, but it's really growing. And I don't know if maybe you have other stats on how much people actually consume podcasts versus video. If that's, is it still a growing thing? Is it going to keep growing? Is it going to morph and change into something else in the coming years?
I think it's, not that I've got any data on the top of my head to back this up, but I believe it's still growing. Mm-hmm. And like just from my experience, back in 2013, no one knew what a podcast was. And now there's podcasts and everything. I think it is becoming very much a mainstream medium to consume information. And you've got Audible, similar thing, obviously audiobooks, and people just get into the rhythm of educating themselves and listening on the go, whether it's walking the dog, it's cooking the dinner, whatever it might be. So I think for now, things are positive for podcasting. One thing that I do get frustrated with is the lack of information on data, on listeners. Very, very frustrating. Like, just anyone out there doesn't know, I mean, you may be slightly different, I would assume not, but you get location data of where people are. You get downloads. That's pretty much it. That's usable in my experience.
And and from my understanding is that downloads aren't even such a solid metric, because some people have it on auto download, which counts as a download, which doesn't mean that they listened. And 100%. Like you said, it's dismal the amount of analytics that you get. What you get on, I think YouTube analytics is probably one of the best that you get.
YouTube's fantastic,
right? Yeah. And
YouTube's
so
fantastic. Yeah.
You see really what's going on, but on the audio, it's really not up to par with what you would expect to have. So
I know Apple did bring something out. I think it was in beta version for ages.
Okay.
Apple Podcast Connect, maybe, which give a bit more information on length that people are listening to the episode, at what point they drop out.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still a thing. I think it is. But when you go into YouTube, it's, the depth that you can go into and the analytics is different class. But then I suppose because you've got the option to download an episode with a podcast is different versus streaming on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So that's slightly different because you don't know what people do when they download it. That's super frustrating. I think that needs to improve. Mm-hmm. I think that helps everyone. That helps podcasters do a better job of catering to the audience.
I agree.
When there's more Joe Rogans who gravitate towards certain platforms, I would guess so, especially at the very, very top end. I think one thing that's a positive for podcasters is the audio quality, the production quality has gone up 100-fold since even just in the last couple of years, like better microphones, better audio setups, and people going to town when it comes to audio setups. And I think anyone that's out there who doesn't have a decent setup and half decent audio quality, I think just falls by the wayside because people are so in tune with what is good and what is listenable, what is digestible and consumable and what's not. So that's one massive positive. I think brands are still looking at podcasts as ways to market their products. I think that's one positive for podcasters. They can monetize their product as well. So I think it's in a good place. personally, I suppose I would say that because I'm hoping that I'm talking sense and it's going to carry on this way. But I think one important thing is for me, especially the last few years, it's that diversify and not just have the podcast. As a self-employed person, it's important to diversify and have other income streams, not just podcasts. So yeah, I think that's an important conclusion there.
That's a perfect segue to talk about SportSmith.
Yes. Yeah. So August last year, rebranded. That process went on from January last year. So it's a long old process. Now I was dragged kicking and screaming through the process because it was hard, really hard. So we got
Did you do it by yourself? No, you got some people
I could not have done it on my own. So we got a designer on board and we filled in a sheet, like, what do you want this to be? And I think a blank bit of paper, what are your aims, what are your values? And one thing that really I enjoyed the process of was this like continuum. Is the brand masculine or is the brand feminine? Like, where on this continuum is the brand? Is it calm or is it aggressive? Like, where is it? And we had loads of these, and we kind of, and I say we because I had a guy helping me, and we kind of navigated through this of where it should be, and that gave him a bit of an idea of where he wanted to pitch it. And then it was, okay, names. Do you want it super abstract, so it can be whatever you want it to be? Do you want it super focused, so instantly people know what it is? Or do you want something in between? Where do you want that? And we kind of came to SportSmith, which was probably somewhere in between.
Yeah.
It's got a link, it's got the name sport in it, but the Smith is a little bit abstract with obviously the craft element.
I was going to say.
The art element. And I think that was really important because that was a word that we use, which is craft, as we were coming up with words that we wanted to resonate with the brand. And then it was going through, what brand do we currently like? What do we want to model it on? What inspiration can we get? And the one thing that I've always said when talking about the branding process was me gravitating towards something like Ralph Lauren.
Okay.
Like, imagine like a Ralph Lauren polo shirt. It's not shouty. It's not in your face, but it's got the little logo, and you know that represents quality, or you'd hope that represents quality. And I think that's what I wanted. I didn't want it to be red, like black, super masculine, because that's what I had before. I kind of wanted to tone it down a little bit, and I wanted to have it a little bit understated, which is probably not something that our industry does particularly well. I think it's all like, when you think of like a CrossFit, or you think of the brands that are out there, it is quite in your face, it's quite masculine, and that's fine. But I just wanted to just to that back a little bit, and something that fit more me personally of what I would want to represent. And then we come up with the name, the logo, and all that kind of stuff. It took ages. But the theme that I wanted to run through SportSmith was the quality of the contributors, the quality of the authors that we have on the website, through the articles that we publish, through the roundtables that we have, and not divert from that, really. And that's how I would see we differentiate from the other, I suppose, media companies, sports media companies, really, which is what SportSmith, I hope, has become and is becoming, is the quality of the contributors, and that's something that I want to continue. So yeah, that's what it's about, really, and using the podcast as the kind of the hook to get people in, because that's kind of what people know.
Yeah. But
then come inside, have a little look, and look at all this other content that's there for people to get educated, and share knowledge and experience. And yeah, that is SportSmith.
Can you give a bit more detail on the type of content that you'll find there? Is it a subscription platform? Is it these online courses? How did you frame it all?
Yeah, so at this moment in time, everything's free. So everything's free.
Wow.
The only
Why?
different why? Great question. So I didn't think that I had the equity in the non-podcast content to be able to charge up front.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do was build the trust again. So I think I've built some sort of trust with the podcast to then leverage that, but build trust with the more rounded content, which is articles, roundtable videos, written Q&As. What else have we got? And I'll tell you about some things that are up and coming as well. But build trust there as well. And one thing that I wanted to do was pay contributors. That was a big thing for me, was to be able to pay people who were putting their time in to contribute to the site, which we all know, people in our industry, everyone seems to have to do everything for free. So that was a big thing for me as a person, to be able to give finance to these people who are contributing. And the one caveat to all that is I wanted for people to give something to go on SportSmith. If it wasn't going to be monetary, because I didn't feel I had the brand equity to be able to command that, I wanted them to at least give me something, which was a buy-in to the content and a bit of a thank you for the content. So that was an email address. So everything apart from the podcast is behind an email address. So one email address, one password, you remember, and job done. That's it. And that is one, for the reason I've just said, about to bridge that gap between free and paid, and to give me a bit of assurance that I had contact details should I want to then flip to a subscription service, which is the long-term business goal for it. But a lot to do in the meantime. But in terms of offerings, we've got the podcast that sits under there. We've got weekly articles from experts in our industry, which I'd like to branch out into other areas of our industry as well: sports analytics, sports data, physiotherapy, whatever that may be. And we've got the roundtables, and we've got a research review service that is launching in March, which will be cool.
That's great.
Again, my bugbear for research, and this is because I'm just not clever enough to digest it as I should, but helping other coaches do the same, keep up to date with the research, but digest it in a way that is pretty up to date with where we are as a society, really. And then a few of the things that are going to come off the back of it that are going to be on SportSmith and going to, for the time being, at least for the medium term, be for free. So yeah, hopefully it's rounded offering. That's the idea.
It definitely sounds like it. And that brings me to the next question. We were talking about the place of podcasting in 2022. If we talk about the place of online education in 2022, it just like podcasts have flourished over the last few years. It seems everybody's got an online course to sell. Everybody's got some webinar, free or not, that you can take. So how do you position yourself in such a market? And is it or not saturated yet? What's the lay of the land from your perspective, since you've put your 2 feet in it?
Yeah. So from an online course perspective, that is something that is in the pipeline for SportSmith as well. But again, you look around and courses span, from what I understand, from university courses that are 3 years long to a guy speaking for 20 minutes over a PowerPoint presentation. People are calling any of that the two ends of the spectrum courses, and anything in between a course. Like a half an hour presentation speaking over a PowerPoint is not a course. That's a lecture or a presentation. That's what it is for me. So what I didn't want to do is get sucked into that scenario where I'm saying this is a course and it's just someone speaking over a PowerPoint presentation, probably poorly designed and poorly delivered. So it's trying to up the production value of what a course actually is. So when people attend that course, they think, wow, this is highly produced. The video's top quality, the audio's top quality, time and effort and resource has been put in to make my learning experience the best it can be. And that's where I want to pitch SportSmith courses. And I think there's numerous different ways that it will go, but that is the essence of it. How can I create a really cool experience? Not just learn the content, but enjoy it along the way and feel like I've been catered to and someone's done this for me, again, as opposed to stick a PowerPoint presentation on, talk over it, job done. Yes, that's my thinking anyway.
How do you build that experience outside of the in-person world? Because we both know that going to a seminar is great, not only for the content, but for the people you're going to meet, the time you're going to spend with them, that human aspect that we all need, especially in 2022, after the 2 years we've gone through. So how do you reconcile that and make it as, I don't know, a human comes to mind, as human as possible through that online process, or despite that online process?
Yeah, so we have this term here in the UK that seems to be a bit of a buzzword: blended learning.
Okay.
The blended learning approach. And that's the kind of approach that we're going to go down with the courses, is to not only offer evergreen content that is pre-recorded, pre-produced, etc., but have some interaction with experts, whether that be Q&As, whether that be troubleshooting, whether that be just going through the content that is the pre-produced, but going through it with a nuance as part of a Zoom call or whatever it might be. So it's not going to be in person, so to speak, but there is interaction with people in online setting, so that blended learning approach can actually take place. And I think that's really important. And there will be, not to say that there will not be courses that are solely like evergreen content that people can tap into whenever they want. But I think for me, the important thing is to launch a product that has that blended learning approach, that has the pre-recorded, that has the workbooks to work through, the questions to answer to make sure people are learning and taking in the information, having the chats with the tutor or whoever it may be, to have all this thing playing out at the same time to make sure people are getting the best experience.
Last question for you, Rob. And first of all, I want to thank you for today. It was a lot of fun being able to chat podcasting with you. A little meta, but I'll take it. It was a lot of fun. Where would you like to see SportSmith in 5 years?
From a business perspective, I would like to see it being a little bit more rounded and pulling in different areas of sports performance, like I mentioned before, sports. Data science, data analysis, physiotherapy, psychology, a bit more rounded, more 360 view of performance. I think that'd be one thing. And I think I want it to be the go-to place for sports performance practitioners to learn, whether that be through a research review that takes 10 minutes to read, or a course that is 20 hours long. And everything in between, in different mediums, whether it be written, verbal. That's the idea, to kind of hit each continuum as much as possible.
That's fantastic. Well, I obviously wish you all the best in that. Where can people find out more about SportSmith?
SportSmith.co, and on Twitter and Instagram, SportSmith HQ. They're probably the best place to shoot over to the website. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Yeah, that's where all the updates are coming.
Well, the links will be in the show notes. Rob, thanks again for coming on. It was a lot of fun. Congrats on everything you've done in the podcasting world so far. Like I said, I was listening to yours well before I knew I was even going to start one. So I look forward to continuing on that, and I wish you all the best, man.
Thank you very much. Cheers for having me.
Pleasure. Take care.
Bye, mate.
Thanks for listening to this episode. If you would like to support the podcast, please take a few moments to leave a written review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch this episode again, you can find the full video recording on my YouTube channel. You'll also find hundreds of hours of free content, all my podcasts, my thoughts of the day, structured presentations, and more. So don't wait, go subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.